I don't know about you guys, but we have seen the Natalia Grace docuseries and we can't stop talking about it. So we're going to talk about it with you today. Join us today on Fostering the Future.
Welcome to the Fostering the Future podcast, a show about all things child welfare, dependency, adoption, and foster care. Here are your hosts, veterans in the world of child welfare, Jack and Kat.
We believe that every human has incredible and equal value regardless of what side of the courtroom we sit on. We hope that everyone feels welcome and accepted here on Fostering the Future.
Make sure you follow us on Facebook or Instagram as Fostering the Future Podcast, or check us out on our website at fosteringthefuturepodcast.org.
This is Kat, and I am here with Jack, and today we are going to talk about the international adoption and abandonment of Natalia Grace.
This is a wild story, and we have been talking about it, I want to say for weeks, but maybe months.
Definitely.
Pretty much every time we talk lately, something about Natalia will come up. I think it's so complex, and I feel like every time we start researching, every time you uncover something, it leads to 10 more questions. We were saying today, we're never going to get to the bottom of this because the bottom keeps dropping.
The more we discover, the more we find there is to discover.
You can view on Hulu or on the Max app the docuseries called The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. If you watch this docuseries, it's going to tell the story about the international adoption of this child from Ukraine and how she came to this point where she was adopted, disrupted, adopted, and instead of disrupting her new family decided to abandon her, but to make it legal, she was aged into an adult, so there wouldn't be responsibility. I mean, that's the bottom line. There's a lot of questions. I don't know if we'll ever know the truth, but I think we have a pretty good grasp on the facts here, Kat.
I think one of the reasons we talked about it so much is because we haven't agreed on every point.
Now that we've done so much research and watched it at least twice, I feel like we're on the same page.
Yes. So when we first watched this, we didn't watch it together and we didn't agree.
Right. Also, we should note that the docuseries that currently exists is basically narrated by the adoptive father.
True. And it's highly biased. And we're going to get into this too. I am disgusted by how this child is portrayed and also how the mother is portrayed, even though she has a lot of faults. Everybody is a human and some things are sacred.
Right.
And there are parts of her that should not have been shown, parts of her body that should be private. I mean, the docuseries is definitely made for entertainment.
Yeah.
It's made for entertainment.
I think one of the ways that we can kind of break this down is let's introduce all the people involved just so we have an idea of who we're talking about. So let's start with Natalia Grace.
Okay. So Natalia Grace was a child who was adopted from the Ukraine in 2008 approximately. She was adopted by another family who has mostly been unnamed. If any person does enough research, they will find the original family's names.
Really? Because I looked, I couldn't find anything.
Yeah, I found them. I don't know why that adoption disrupted. We know that the agency was in Florida. The agency they adopted through was in Florida. Natalia Grace is a child who was born in the Ukraine and was diagnosed with dwarfism at birth, as well as several other conditions that are often related with dwarfism. When she was born, she remained in the hospital for a month and then was placed in a Ukrainian orphanage where she stayed until she was approximately 4.5 years old. And then we know that she came to the U.S. Natalia had co-occurring conditions like club feet. Her digits were not developing appropriately. Her doctors recognized the abnormalities right away. The current adoptive mother is Christine Barnett. As far as we know, she was raised Amish until she met Michael, who is the adoptive father.
And she left the Amish community to marry him, right?
That's what we understand.
She's actually a parenting author.
One of their older sons, which we'll get to, had some exceptionalities. So she wrote a book called The Spark, and now she writes curriculum. Michael has been in retail sales most of his life. He's worked like manager at Circuit City kind of jobs, been like a manager of like payday loans. He is like the narrator of the series, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace.
Michael and Christine had 3 other children, all boys.
They're all older. We have Jacob, who is the oldest brother. He was the inspiration behind the book, The Spark. He is a genius. His IQ is very, very high, speculated 170. The average IQ is 100. So we're talking a very, very smart kid. He said that he hasn't seen Natalia in a decade, and he currently resides in Canada, Waterloo, Ontario. He is studying theoretical physics.
We should note about Jacob that he actually has a heavy presence in the docuseries. He's the oldest of their 4 children. He has a diagnosis of autism. However, I did read that around the age of 10, a doctor said he didn't need to use that diagnosis anymore. He is the only biological child that is in communication with the father, Michael. The other 2 boys, Michael hasn't seen or talked to in a really long time. Yeah. During the docuseries, he's living with his dad, he says, in the basement, which is a little odd because what we found online is that he appears to still be living in Ontario studying at the Perimeter Institute.
That's one of the first things in the docuseries that I found to be an inconsistency, because Jacob, he is shown to be like a stunted person emotionally and socially. It appears that he lives in his father's basement, but that is not accurate. He is a PhD student in theoretical physics in Canada, living on his own. He's living independently. It appears to be misinformation. His life is so full that prevented him from returning for his father's trial in 2022. Television is television, and they did seem to make Jacob look a certain way.
It could also be that he was nervous being on the show. They could have moved him home. His dad could have had him come stay with him to be part of the show.
Right.
And they played it off as, oh, he said something like, I've been backsliding emotionally, so I'm staying with my dad now. So maybe that was just for a time. Maybe it was just the way they explained him to be on the show.
He did say some depreciating things about himself. I think he did say, I've been backsliding, or something about him being emotionally stunted, not those words. He did seem to be a very self-aware person. They did make him look like he was living in his father's basement, and he does not appear to be doing so. We do know that Jacob was homeschooled until he was about 10, and then he went to a university.
There's also 2 other brothers that we don't know a lot about. Their faces are always blurred out. They're obviously not part of the docuseries. Neither is their mother. Their names are Wesley and Ethan. I believe Wesley is the next oldest. And I think Ethan was the same age as Natalia Grace, because I think they were excited that Ethan would have a sister the same age. So he would have been 6 when Natalia was adopted by them. We learn a little bit about their diagnosis and stuff like that, but not too much more.
We also have some previous adoptive parents. We don't know their names. And then we have new adoptive parents who are really just like fictive kids. There's no legal adoption. And that would be Cynthia and Antoine Mans. And they are currently taking care of Natalia Grace.
Cynthia and Antoine Mans are her current family, even though they have not legally adopted her because the Barnetts will not allow them to.
For anybody who is new to this, Christine and Michael Barnett got Natalia, and then they claimed that Natalia was not a child. Natalia was adopted from the Ukraine originally by a couple in either Massachusetts or New Hampshire in 2008 approximately. She was 4.5 years old when she got here. We don't know much about that adoption. She was there for a year. That didn't work out. We don't know if she was in foster care or what happened. She ended up back with the agency again. And I wish we knew more about that. We just don't. She ended up with the Barnetts, and they got her and they went to Disney World for a week.
Barnetts are over here in Indiana. They have these 3 boys. They seem to be doing great. Michael, he is over the top, and he's talking about all their fancy cars and their 5,000 square foot house and their 20 couches and their 13 TVs. I think he was trying to make the point that they were doing well. His wife was an author, and he was in retail sales.
She also had a daycare for special needs kids in their garage.
Oh, yeah. They decide they want to adopt a child. And my thinking based on, I guess, looking at the characters here is that Christine wanted a girl. She had 3 boys. She probably felt like if I want a girl, I'm going to have to adopt her. So they want a girl. They almost adopted a girl from Haiti. But when the earthquake shut down international adoptions in Haiti in 2010, that was off the drawing board for them. This is where things get a little weird. According to Michael, this adoption agency cold calls them out of nowhere about Natalia Grace. Says, this is an emergency. If you don't decide in the next couple of days, she's going to go to foster care. She's going to go into the system. According to Michael, they were so impressed with this family's mission to help children with special needs that they called them out of nowhere and said, hey, we've heard about how great you are. Okay, explain to me how an agency in Florida with a child with dwarfism knows about this family in Indiana that works with kids with autism. It really seems to me, I mean, I wasn't there. I can't speak for sure on what happened, but to me, I feel like this is something that they inquired about, but then later we're like, oh, they called us and asked us because we're so special and we do so well with special needs. I don't buy that. I don't think they were cold called. I've never heard of someone randomly cold calling someone they don't know and saying, hey, I heard how amazing you are. Will you adopt this child with a special need that has nothing to do with any of the special needs that you have dealt with? I'm not buying it.
I haven't heard of that happening either. What I have heard happening in the documentary or the docuseries was the previous adoptive family was calling other families, asking for help, asking for other families, would you be interested in adopting? But they were calling families with dwarfism.
Right.
So I don't actually think they called this family. They were specifically calling families with dwarfism and saying, would you be interested in adopting her? Which I think that would have been great for her.
Yeah.
She really needed to be with a family who understood the accommodations that she needed to survive and thrive.
There was a family that even wanted to take her, but for whatever reason, they wouldn't let that family take her unless they paid.
So, yeah. That's the other reason I don't think that family called, because that family wanted
reimbursement of their adoption expenses.
And the Barnetts didn't do that.
Right.
I think the family eventually just gave her back. That adoption agency took her.
You know, I could totally be wrong, but I don't believe that they cold called him. No. They have nothing to do with the dwarfism community. Maybe somebody told the Barnetts about this child, and maybe it was in 48 hours, she's going into the system if somebody doesn't come take her. But I don't believe that they were called because they're so special.
I have a lot of concerns about this adoption, but one of my concerns about this adoption was that the Barnetts lied about during their home study. And
right.
That the home study provider didn't double check. One of those lies was that they asked if they had a history of domestic violence, and the Barnetts said no. And the home study provider did not run a criminal background check. And I'm shocked. I can't even imagine not running a background check. First of all, it's so easy.
I mean, did they run the background check, saw the problem, and were like, we're going to pretend we didn't run a background check because we need to find a home for this child?
That's such a great point. Maybe they did.
I mean,
they did.
Because obviously if they had done the background check and seen the charges, that would have been a reason for concern, especially when you hear what happens later. They pick up this child from this adoption agency.
Michael talks about when he gets there, he calls it a rundown little...
I don't know how many adoption agencies you've been to, but I tend to find that they're nonprofit agencies.
With no money.
With no money.
With no money.
I mean, you actually worked for an agency.
I did.
Was it in a fancy part of town in a plush office?
No, everything was a donation.
I'm not saying that this was a great adoption agency, because if they didn't run a background check or if they lied about a background check, that is very concerning, but I don't think it's a problem that they're in a strip mall.
No, that's a very common location.
I would be more worried if they had a plush office, because where are you getting all this money from?
Right, a nonprofit is not allowed to make a profit.
When we had our international adoption, if I had gone to the lawyer's office and it was in this beautiful fancy area with nice offices, those would be huge red flags for me.
There's not a lot of other talk about the adoption process.
No.
The docuseries talks about how they lie on their home study. And Beth Karras does mention the Barnetts lied on their home study. Can we trust anything else they say? And this is not a quote, paraphrasing what she said, but I think that's a great point. They pick her up She says, hi, mommy and daddy, according to
Michael.
And they go to Disney.
So they're in a hotel in Florida. They're going to Disney. According to Michael, something happened in that hotel bathroom. This is going to be a huge part of this story. And the problem is, even if it's true, I feel like the wrong actions were taken after. Also, and maybe this is just in the way he tells the story, I'm not buying it.
No,
Are you buying it?
No, I don't buy it.
According to Michael Barnett in this docuseries, his wife Christine is bathing the child in the bathroom at the hotel. He says he hears this scream and a loud noise. And then Christine comes running out and says, you have to come here and see this. And he says she looked pale like a ghost.
All the color drained from her face. I'm expecting like a swastika tattoo on her or something.
He says that she calls him into the bathroom, points at the child and says, look down there, pointing to the child's pubic region. He describes seeing pubic hair on this child who they believe is 6 years old.
This poor little girl.
Right.
Okay, she went from Ukraine to New Hampshire or Massachusetts to Florida, where who knows where she was, probably a foster home, to not even her new permanent home. She doesn't know where she lives. They take her to a hotel, a resort. She's not eating food, like home cooked food. She's eating resort food.
Right.
And she's at Disney World. She's at Disney World.
Talk about like overwhelming overstimulation.
Trauma. It's all
shoulder
trauma.
to shoulder people.
She's learned the language a year ago. And now this strange woman is bathing her. So she's getting naked in front of the strange woman. And now she points at her vagina and is screaming.
And brings a grown man in to look at it. The other thing we have to consider is a child who is in an orphanage is going to be more vulnerable to abuse. We don't know what her history is. We don't know if she was physically or sexually abused in her orphanage. I'm not saying she was. I'm just saying we don't know.
The chances are much higher.
We don't know if she was abused physically or sexually in any other part of the story where there wasn't one consistent adult taking great care of her. Mm-hmm. So now you've got her in a bathtub. A child in a bathtub is the most vulnerable thing. There are so many kids that come into foster care who have major issues at bath time because of previous trauma and also because it's so vulnerable. You're taking a child when they're scared and they're in that fight or flight mode and putting them naked with a stranger. I had a child come to me with suspected physical abuse. I didn't see all the marks. And when I put this child in the bathtub, the fingerprint marks around his neck, all over his body were old and new bruises. I had tears flooding my eyes. Never in a million years would I start screaming or tell someone to come look or bring another person in that bathtub. I took some deep breaths, put a smile on my face, tried to make him as comfortable as possible, and helped him to bathe himself. I'm the adult. I'm the one who has to make this child feel safe. I had to pull my tears back into my tear ducts, toughen it up, and put a smile on my face and make him feel safe, not scream and go in this dramatic way with my face drained of color. That's probably how I felt on the inside. But you have to be an adult.
Right. You're right about like the bathtub being such a vulnerable place. Even like pouring water on the child's head, the most vulnerable thing of all is the child's genitalia. And she didn't even know them.
Because of the way he's telling the story, it just feels made up and it just doesn't feel like something that probably happened. And if they wanted to pretend this child was an adult, this is how you would do it.
So when you have two parents that have three other children who have had special needs, which we can talk about later, they know how to pick up a phone and call a doctor. I don't know about you, but if this were my child, I would pick up a phone and call a pediatrician and say, this is really odd. My 6-year-old is developing pubic hair. Can you take a look? Especially if I have a child who already has some special needs, especially if those special needs include growth disorder. I am not a doctor. I'm saying that I would consult with one because that is their job. Is it possible that she has precocious puberty? That would be my question. Although at this point, I don't think she did. I think that they've made a lot of things up.
So the question is, was there never pubic hair? Did the story never happen? Was there maybe pubic hair, which we're not sure we believe? But even if there was, when I looked up her form of dwarfism and other forms of dwarfism, it is often associated with endocrine hormonal imbalance. I might have said that wrong. I am not a doctor. I am not in the medical field. I'm just trying to understand what this could be. Mm-hmm. If an endocrine hormonal imbalance is associated with dwarfism, And one form of endocrine hormonal imbalance is precocious puberty.
Unfortunately, we can't go back in time. But when we do go back and look at that day and those pictures from that time, what we do see is a little girl that had baby teeth. We see a little girl with fine hair and little curls, just this tiny little child.
I guess the reason this is so important is because when they look down and see the pubic hair, suddenly they feel like they're in the movie The Orphan, which we'll talk about later. Suddenly they think that their 6-year-old adopted child from Ukraine is actually a grown woman impersonating a child to scam them. So this is the basis of a lot of things going forward. If there was pubic hair and she was a child, which all other signs seem to point to, pubic hair being present is part of something called precocious puberty, which, as we said, is an endocrine hormonal imbalance, which can be associated with dwarfism. But even not considering that link, when I looked up precocious puberty, there were like 2 or 3 things that often cause it. And one of them is trauma. What can we say for sure about Natalia Grace?
Oh, definitely.
She has had trauma. Even if you don't believe anything ever happened to her in the United States, she lived in an orphanage and her mother abandoned her at the orphanage. That is trauma.
That's definitely trauma. And we don't know what happened at the orphanage. But then she was abandoned again.
Right.
By the second foster family. We do know that not taking a 6-year-old child to the doctor to get to the bottom of pubic hair at 6, well, I would say there's a bit of medical neglect there. To me, when I look at the whole story, which I acknowledge we only have a bit of the story, I feel like this is the first domino to fall out of many dominoes that get us to the big picture, which is just a very, very sad picture.
I was in the process of an international adoption from 2010 until 2012 when my son was adopted. There are certain things that are known in the adoption community. It is something that pops up on Facebook groups all the time. People asking about precocious puberty. Why is it showing up so much in the adoption community? Trauma. This is a running commentary that happens often in international groups on social media because we all know it's so prevalent in international adoptions. Yeah. For them to not even consider that this could be a medical issue makes me believe their story even less.
The Barnetts go home. Michael describes the day they got Natalia as one of the 5 best days of his life. Michael starts to describe the coming days. He describes one day when he comes home from work. Christine, his wife, makes Natalia tell him, "I have a period and I've been hiding it." Later, this is refuted. And on Dr. Phil, Natalia states that she still has not had a period, and her new family has also said that she still has not started her menstrual cycle. But also, there was some discussion of how they did find some blood on her underwear. All of this is concerning.
I mean, do we know 100% there was blood in the underwear, or is that just what they said?
This is just something that they said.
I have heard before about children who were sexually abused and it was found out because someone saw blood in their underwear.
So that is why I'm concerned. Blood in underwear is a sign of sexual abuse.
Now we have the added concern of if there even was blood in the underwear, was there some sexual abuse going on by someone in or around the home? Even if there was blood in the underwear, if that was true and it wasn't from sexual abuse, it could be from precocious puberty. It can be associated with both dwarfism and trauma, which she has both of them. I don't know, because if her new family is stating that she still has not received a period, I don't buy it.
I don't either. I feel like there are a few other things that could cause a person to bleed. And one of them with dwarfism is a lack of hygiene. You do lack hygiene when you lack adaptability tools. And little people require adaptability tools like grabbers and step stools and help with things like hygiene. And
I only know that because of the show Little People, Big World. What I saw on that show was a house that was adapted for little people. And obviously this is a family of little people. So they're going to have the kind of support and resources that a family with no knowledge or support system in the little people community would have. It looks like they weren't even trying. As my children reach certain struggles, I do everything I can to learn about how to help them in those struggles and to support them. You got to do research. You got to how am I going to be the best parent I could possibly be for this kid? And then go figure it out.
Well, right. Because We want them to grow and develop and learn so they can become the best adult they can be.
And an independent adult.
Yeah.
And if you have a child who is a little person, buying them a step stool, I mean, maybe there was a step stool.
The reason I say that is because there were not step stools in her apartment. There were not adaptive tools in the pictures of her apartment. All of that could have been explained by the variety of medical conditions that she has. And she needed to be seeing a physician regularly. And we know that she didn't receive adequate medical care for reasons that we haven't talked about yet.
The Barnetts use the fact that she's supposedly had a period and the fact that she supposedly has pubic hair to prove that she is older than she says she is. Now, if that were true, now look at all the things they videoed, all of the documentations they had to try and prove to people that this child was really an adult. Why is there no proof? Why didn't they go to a doctor and get actual proof? There's no proof. They didn't submit proof at court.
No.
Right? The only thing they submitted at court to try and prove their point was a letter from the dad's doctor.
The only thing that shows that Natalia was an adult at that time was
hearsay from Michael and Christine.
Yeah.
So, and it seems awfully convenient in a lot of the scenarios and how they turn out. The other thing that the Barnetts question is whether she's Ukrainian, right?
Yeah.
So that becomes a thing. So they're saying she has pubic hair. They're saying she has a period. It sounds like Christine just starts interrogating her pretty regularly and wants to know why she doesn't know the names of the other people at the orphanage with her, why she doesn't know more of her story. I guess they get someone who's Ukrainian to come talk to her and she didn't seem to understand.
Yeah,
but it all seems very controlling. It seems like they're trying to coach things out of her. The videos of Christine interrogating her, they terrify me. So first of all, she was a child. My 6-year-old, I can ask him, hey, who did you hang out with at school today? Oh, I can't remember their names. You're asking a 6-year-old girl to remember names of the people in the orphanage when she was 4, which is crazy.
Right. Long-term memory starts around 3. And this is a child with trauma, which impacts memory.
Right.
She does not remember. And Christine they have video of this. They took video. Somehow she thinks it's okay that she did this. They have video of her standing with her nose to the wall for hours and hours and hours. And she would wet herself. She would soil herself. And then when that didn't work, because obviously this child could not remember, and she was saying stuff like, tell us who you really are.
Yeah.
So she seemed to think this child had this secret life, like a spy or something. This child who had baby teeth.
Right.
This child with like little baby curls. I mean, they filmed their own abuse of this child, like on camera.
I know that one of the reasons she was trying to say that Natalia was not really from Ukraine is because she didn't have an accent. My son had an accent when he moved here from Africa. And I would say it was about a year before the accent started to go away.
Yeah, if you learn a new language prior to puberty, you will generally speak that new language without an accent. If you learn a new language after puberty, you will generally have an accent. And there's evidence-based, peer-reviewed studies that show that.
So that's like the scientific stuff. I can just tell you from my experience, the videos that I have of Jack Jr., when he was home about a year or two, the accent wasn't there anymore. And I know that specifically because he has the cutest accent in the world. So I have to really go back to those early videos when I want to hear it. And Natalia Grace at this point had been in the U.S. for 2 years, right? 1.5 years?
Yeah, I think it was like 1.5 years. She probably didn't really remember her home language very much. By the time someone tried to talk to her 1.5 years or 2 years later, she probably lost a lot of that language. You know?
Yeah.
It's probably really confusing for her.
If these people weren't buying crutches and shoes and adaptive things for her, I don't think they were teaching her Ukraine.
Right. My parents are deaf. I was raised signing, and my ASL skills are, I would say, mediocre at best because I haven't lived with my parents in over 20 years. You know, you lose language. You lose your language skills if you don't use them.
The next thing that happens is that, according to Michael in the docuseries, Christine is screaming and yelling from the kitchen because she walked out of the room for a minute and supposedly Natalia had poured maybe Pledge into her coffee. And so she came back and took a sip and realized what happened and started screaming and everybody came running. And she's like, she was trying to poison me. This is probably one of the bases that they use to try and talk about how mentally unstable Natalia is. I don't feel like this was a poisoning. I don't think she was trying to kill her. Kids who have trauma who are trying to mess with someone, but also kids who are just trying to be funny, put something in someone's drink. We're also talking about a 6-year-old girl.
Is it possible she was just pouring?
Baby Jack loves to pour one thing into another. And was she just playing around and not realizing what the chemicals were? Did she just think she was being funny? A friend of mine had a placement of a child who actually peed in the foster dad's shampoo bottle. Like he was mad and it was a behavior, but he wasn't trying to kill him. You know what I mean? He wasn't trying to burn his hair out.
And I guess we should talk about that, because can we believe anything they say? They lied on their home
The Barnetts?
study.
No.
Right. No, first of all, we can't. But if she did it, you have to expect behavior. First of all, from kids who've had no trauma, you have to expect behavior. But you definitely have to expect behavior from kids who have had trauma.
100.
And she's had a lot. She regularly has had trauma from her own adoptive mother. This is a child who had no secure attachments. And she was acting out in various ways. She was like defecating on herself. She was urinating, according to them, urinating on herself.
Which is actually a really common thing with kids who've had a lot of trauma.
And it's common in kids who are seeking control in their life. Would I be like necessarily surprised that a child did that? I'd be alarmed, but like not necessarily surprised.
Yeah.
Would I blame her? No. Do I believe the Barnetts? Not necessarily.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I believe this ever even happened. The way that Michael tells this story, she screamed and we all came running. It was very reminiscent of the scream about the pubic hair in the bathtub. Right. And to me, it just felt so put on. Like It was so dramatic. It was like he's rehearsed the story.
Yes. And my wife screams and I come running and I save her from the orphan.
According to the Barnetts, she's got the pubic hair. She's got the period. She tried to, quote, poison Christine with putting, I've seen 3 different things: bleach, pledge, and then something else.
And then we've got the knives. Apparently she's trying to kill them with knives also. I think she was always caught just like standing there with a knife, and she had knives under her bed.
And according to them, she said, I want to kill you.
You know, this is a child with no sense of safety. This is a child who is repeatedly being asked to stand against a wall. She's repeatedly sent to her room. She's repeatedly yelled at, who are you really? Where do you really come from? She is seeking control. We know that because she is regularly urinating and on herself or in places that she shouldn't.
It seems like a lot of PTSD symptoms. Michael talks about, I think, a couple different times where he wakes up and she's standing there in the middle of the night, or he goes in her room and she's standing there in the middle of the night just staring. There's a thing called night terrors, and that is a very common behavior, and night terrors are associated with PTSD.
I would not be surprised at all if she had knives under her bed. But you know what I would also do if any of my kids was behaving in a dangerous way with something like a knife, is I would remove all the knives. This is a child who's like 30 inches tall.
Yeah.
She can't reach the knives.
Yeah. These stories start to continue about her doing things to hurt people in the family. There was a story about her throwing the homework in the highway to try and get the brothers to run after it so they could get killed. If you're a movie buff, this might sound a bit familiar. They've got all these stories about how she's dangerous. Michael says they finally find a psychiatrist who understood what they were saying about Natalia. They said this is the 3rd or 4th psychiatrist they went to, and they finally get one to say, oh, she's dangerous. Oh, she's a sociopath. You're in danger. And he said she really had her number. Well, if you keep going to psychiatrists and telling them the same thing over and over and having them talk to this child, you'll eventually find someone who'll just agree with you tell them.
Right. It's called doctor shopping. You can't be diagnosed as a sociopath. That's not a clinical diagnosis. A child could be diagnosed with a conduct disorder if it was severe enough and she was, harming.
If she was actually harming someone.
Yes. If she was harming animals, harming people, like repeated burglaries, those kinds of things. If a child kills a dog, probably, yes.
But everything is hearsay from the Barnetts.
Yes.
There are times where she says these things, but it all seems coached. And we find out later from, I think, Michael and from Natalia herself saying Christine made her say these things.
Yes. If she had been of age, then it's possible she could have been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. If he had said someone diagnosed her with a conduct disorder, it's still a very alarming diagnosis that you do not see very often because it has lifelong implications.
If you were struggling with one of your children and you bring them to a psychiatrist and they tell you whatever they tell you, but it's not what you think it is. You might bring them to a second psychiatrist. Do you bring them to a third? Do you keep going until someone just agrees with what you have to say? If you're looking for truth, that is not what you do. If you're looking for actual truth and a factual diagnosis, you're not going to 4 different psychiatrists.
Right.
This one says they're not safe. Can we talk about what happened on the farm?
So the family talks about how they're basically living as hostages in their own little hell, and Natalia is the devil, basically. Like, she's keeping them as hostages. They can't go anywhere. But it's one of the children's birthdays. I think it's Ethan's. All he wants to do is milk a cow.
And he's the youngest.
He's the youngest. What a sweet story. Ethan wants to milk a cow. What they don't say on the docuseries is that Natalia, her feet are incredibly affected by her dwarfism, and she needs specialized shoes, which she did not get until just a few years ago when she was with the Mann family. The Mann family took her to get specialized shoes, which she had to have specially made. So when they got to the farm, it was quite a long walk to the cows.
We've seen videos of her walking.
She barely walked.
She didn't have the right shoes. She didn't have the right devices. You can't throw this child in a stroller or a wheel. I cannot imagine.
A wagon. Put her on her back. She's like 30 pounds.
I can't imagine bringing my 6-year-old to a farm where he's going to have to walk far and not bringing a stroller of some sort.
Even my 10-year-old gets really tired.
Could you imagine someone struggling to walk and not bringing some type of device? Like, I get maybe like a regular umbrella stroller is not going to work in the dirt, but bring a jog. Like, how do you have a child like this and not have a way to transport them when it's not cement, right? A wagon, bring a jogging stroller, something.
I was even thinking, like, the farm probably had wagons.
She's also tiny. Throw her on your back.
I've thrown my 10-year-old on my back.
If she's that small, can't she fit in an ergo?
Yeah.
It almost seems aggressive.
This poor kid, she never stood a chance. So the farmers, which I guess would be the employees of the farm, they tell the Barnett family that you cannot get close to the fence because it's an electric fence and it will shock you. I don't know if you have any experience with electric fence, do you?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. My grandma had a ranch when I was growing up, and we spent a lot of time out there, and I have definitely touched that electric fence many times. It just barely hurts. The family is walking, and Natalia can't walk anymore. She wants to sit down. Christine starts to struggle with Natalia, and they are struggling, and Michael wants to intervene, and she very heroically says, "No, Michael, go ahead with Ethan," and sends Michael ahead with the boys.
Of course, because she's the hero in her story.
Yes. So Michael goes ahead with the boys so that Ethan can milk the cow. She and Natalia struggle. According to the parents, Natalia pulls Christine towards the electric fence. There's a struggle. There's screaming. The farmers get involved. The EMT is called. When the EMTs get there, they report that Natalia is very calm and she's fine. And Christine is the one that is losing her mind. Christine demands that Natalia is like Baker acted or whatever. And Natalia goes to a psychiatric hospital. And she's kept there for a couple weeks, I guess.
This whole incident seems a little planned.
Yeah.
Right? They had to know that at a certain point she was going to want to sit down and couldn't keep walking. The Barnetts tell this story a certain way, but was it one of the farmers or one of the EMTs that were interviewed later and were like, none of that
both
really happened?
Both. And the farmers were like, the electric fence wasn't even on. It was no big deal.
Right.
But both told the story differently. And they both said that Natalia was fine. She just wanted to sit down. And Christine was the one that was very upset. Christine's the only one that says that Natalia tried to pull her towards the electric fence.
It sounds like it would be plausible. I'm not saying this is what happened, but it almost seems like they were frustrated because they just didn't want to continue parenting this child. And so if you wanted to find a way to get a child hospitalized and the things you've done at home haven't worked, then this seems like a pretty great setup where you could do something in public where the ambulance would need to be called and forced to Baker act her.
Poor Ethan. What a bummer on his birthday.
All of these children, regardless of which side you fall on, these children have not won the lottery of their home life.
So this story gets really sticky and gross here. In the docuseries, I'll just say this really fast. There are some employees of the hospital that spoke on confidentiality, and with good reason, because they all violated HIPAA, which is like horrific. I don't believe what they say.
I think the main things they were saying was about her being over-sexualized, right?
Yeah. And they also say she was moved to the adult unit, which I don't believe. There was no documentation suggesting that she was an adult. So how would you bill insurance for the adult side? There's too many checks and balances when you are in the hospital. Plus, I know plenty of children who have been hospitalized with much more severe behaviors than what they're describing, and they stay on the child unit. Right. I don't believe what they're saying. Plus, I don't know a single person that would compromise or risk their career with their voice.
Yeah.
I think these were like custodians. I think these were like, or if they even worked at the hospital.
Well, but even if it was true that she was acting over-sexualized, that doesn't mean she was older. Yeah. The only thing it says to me is that there's a high likelihood that she's been sexually abused.
If it's true, this is no surprise. It's consistent. This is probably a child who's been sexually abused.
It's consistent with defecation, playing with her defecation. Right. It's consistent with blood in the underwear. It's consistent with her being in fight or flight.
All of these things.
Something pretty big happens while she's hospitalized. Can we talk about that?
You're right. Something very significant does happen. While she was hospitalized, the Barnetts filed a motion to have her re-aged, which this is a new thing for me. I have never worked in the international adoption community. I've never even heard of this happening until this case.
In the international adoption community, everybody kind of knows. There are obviously countries where birth certificates aren't as much of a thing culturally. Birthdays aren't even necessarily celebrated in the same way. Re-aging is something that is talked about in the international adoption community. It is known that sometimes if you adopt your child, maybe they'll shave off a year or two because they think that's more desirable. I don't know that really happens that often. I think it's more of a myth. I think that if they're shaving off age, it's not really that much. And also, there are ways to determine when a child needs to be re-aged, and you go to specialists at certain hospitals in the country. You don't just talk to your primary physician and get their opinion while you're putting your own opinion in there, have them write a letter and get a judge to re-age them. But it looks like all of the specialists that they went to said they either couldn't confirm her age or they confirmed her age as between 6 and 8 years old. So it is known in the international adoption community that this is something that you have to consider might be a thing.
But
right?
like a year or two.
But like
maybe.
A year or two, maybe.
Right.
I don't think this has ever been something that's really talked about much from Ukraine.
This is what Michael Barnett said. He said at one point he talked to a police officer who suggested maybe she's not the correct age. Maybe she's a little older. I think that it's his MO to not be the responsible party. So who knows if that's really what happened. This is such a disgusting abuse of power. But basically, the judge indicates that no one knows what her real age is and that it appeared as though she hadn't grown in 4 years. And the judge believed that people stop growing at 18, which I think is hysterical because I don't think I've grown since I was 12. What about you?
Yeah.
Because of that, she must be at least 18. So let's add 4 years to that, which would be 22. And that would be a 14-year jump from her original birth certificate.
Well, and I think it's interesting to note that nobody until this judge had suggested such a large age jump other than the Barnetts. Even the doctor who suggested she might be older, when questioned later, he said, I didn't say she was 22. That was the judge came up with that. You imagine a judge re-aging someone based on that type of, I don't think I've grown an inch since I was 12 years old or 13 years old. So why don't you say 12 or 13 plus 4? You know what's interesting about this age 22 years?
In the state of Indiana, a child with disabilities is dependent on their parent for the first 21 years of their life.
This judge happened to decide that Natalia Grace was the exact age she would have to be in order for her parents not to be responsible for her.
Yes.
You know what else I heard is that this was decided, there was like an emergency motion. I read this online, so take it for what you will, but I heard this re-aging motion happened without a hearing.
Stop it.
It happened without Natalia Grace being present, and it was filed as an ex parte motion. If she was 22, you're making legal decisions for her without inviting her.
No.
You're just basing it on a motion that was filed.
It's like such a disgusting abuse of power.
There is so much more to share about this story. Please join us again next week to hear so much more.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure you subscribe and follow us on social. We hope that you join us again next time and keep on fostering the future.